On this episode of Web at Night, we continue our discussion of content management systems. We talked about WordPress last week, and this week we're talking about Drupal. We're going to explain what Drupal is, why you might want to use it to power your website, and what are the differences, WordPress versus Drupal. Which one do you use? All that and more coming up on this week's episode of Web at Night. Web at Night is brought to you by Zygen Hosting, the hosting gateway. Zygen offers VPS hosting, web hosting, IRC-V hosting, Shell, BNC, and more. For more information, visit ZygenHosting.com and use the offer code WebAtNight at checkout to save 20% off your order. And by OWC, Other World Computing, your one-stop shop for all things iOS and Mac. From a wide variety of accessories for your iOS devices to RAM and hard drive upgrades to your Mac, OWC has it all. Visit MacSales.com to learn more. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Web at Night. Glad you could be here. On this week, we're talking all about Drupal, like I said here in the intro. Excited to be back, having a lot of fun times here as we discuss the wonderful world of websites and all the different things you can do with websites. And just so much fun here as long as technology cooperates. With me is going to be my friend here, my partner in crime. As I always say, I need to get a new catchphrase. I always say that, but I never do. Ryan Becker, who knows probably more about this stuff than I do. Ryan, how you doing?
Been doing good, and it's great to be back here with you to discuss another content management system, Drupal.
Yes, this week we are talking about Drupal as, let's see, my little keyboard locks up. Yes, Drupal. We're going to be talking about content management systems. We had a good discussion last week about, what a content management system is, how to use it, and obviously we discussed, to kind of, summarize things. A content management system is usually it's an easy system to use to manage your content. It's probably mostly associated with blogs and managing all your pictures and your blog posts, but it can also be used for doing, back-end things like a web store or things like that in e-commerce, but it's usually pretty popular. And we talked about WordPress last week. If you missed that, check it out, robustech.com/WAN. You can see all the episodes there, get all the links. But in short, we discussed WordPress, very popular content management system, something used by a lot of people to manage not only blogs, but businesses and services and all that kind of stuff. And it's very popular, and we kind of highlighted why it's so popular is because it's so easy to use. And I just wanted to mention this real quick, just to kind of throw this out there. Last week, we talked about WordPress and how it's very customizable. There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of themes you can choose from. And if you know what you're doing, WordPress can usually really enhance the way your website looks, how it works, how it feels, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a blogging type of theme. So here's an example. Here's robustech.com. I was talking to Ryan about this before the show started. This took me about 4 hours last night to do. I decided I was going to redo the website. I didn't like the theme I had, and what's nice about WordPress is there's not a whole lot of custom coding. If you know and you're powerful and you know what to do, you can, but this was pretty much a lot of drag and drop. There's a little bit of custom stuff that had to be done to kind of get these things fixed, and a little bit of learning how the new theme works. But with WordPress, I saved everything I had. I just popped on a new theme, and I have a totally new look and feel of the website, and I really like it. This, again, took about 4 hours. I did a little, had to go back and redo some of the stuff that I had done before and cleaned up some stuff, but just kind of goes to show WordPress is exceedingly simple to use, and if you missed that episode, go check it out. But this week, we're going to be talking about another content management system, which I will, straight out front say I do not know too much about. I've heard about it. I've heard the power of it. But Ryan probably knows more about this, and this is Drupal. So, Ryan, could you just explain, I think, just for a minute, what is Drupal?
Okay, so Drupal compared to WordPress, Drupal is more of a static website system. Drupal does have blogging support built in, and it has built-in support for multi-user blogs and everything like that. But the main push and focus behind Drupal is not blogging, it's website content management.
Right.
So people are still allowed to, it still works on the idea of posts and pages, rather. And you have the ability to, create the pages. But with WordPress, when you first install it, you're launched an interface that says, okay, here, create your first post.
Right.
And when you install a Drupal website, you're not greeted with that. You're greeted with a customize your Drupal site page. And you actually go in and you customize your pages. And if you want to enable the blogging function, that's something you can add later. And It has the ability to send posts to the front page. You can have each user have their own blog or whatever. But like I said, Drupal is more based around the idea of a static content website, not necessarily a blog site.
Right, and I think that's one of the biggest things that people need to understand. We'll obviously be talking about the differences between WordPress and Drupal, but like Ryan said, WordPress, where it's more, it doesn't have to necessarily be blogging. The bread and butter of WordPress is blogging. Drupal, the bread and butter is content management, and it's really made for businesses who are looking, like Ryan said, to mainly do something static. I think that Drupal really excels in, we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but back-end things like services, e-commerce. But Drupal is not meant to be your blogging platform. If you're looking to get started and set your mom or dad up with a blog or, a relative and make it something easy to use, this is not Drupal. But where WordPress kind of falls short in some of the customization aspects, Drupal really picks it up, where it is very customizable. It is very complex, is in the sense that you can really do what you want, and it's really made to be a full-end back-end feature system here. So I'm just going to show off the Drupal website here just to kind of show you what Drupal has here. This is at Drupal.org, I believe. It's open source, like WordPress, and they kind of just show about what Drupal is. Come to the software, stay for the community, and they really focus on the community aspect and what you can do here. But see, we're getting started with Drupal. You could see sites made with Drupal, and you can really see that a lot of people are using Drupal, and there's this big kind of battle between WordPress and Drupal users, but you got to understand the utility for both. And Drupal is really made more for the static page, the back end, and really just not a blogging platform. It's really made for more powerful applications than just that. So I guess we can kind of get into this. So Ryan, we know about Drupal. It's a content management system. Let's just kind of start about it. What are some features that Drupal has that might be appealing to someone who's looking to get in a website, or the advantages of it over, let's say, any content management system, Joomla, or specifically WordPress?
Okay, so Drupal is actually very geared towards the developer. It's geared towards customization and not necessarily ease of use. It's an easy to use system once you pick up on the way it's organized, but when you first get into it, you may not think where certain things are. It might be someplace other than where you'd expect it, but once you get into it, there's a lot of themes and a lot of customizations available for it. Not as much as WordPress, but it's still very extensible and very editable.
Right, I had read something the other day. I was doing a little pre-show prep and kind of looking into Drupal because I'm not too familiar with it. And someone said that if you're going to be someone who wants kind of a cookie-cutter way of doing things and you want a theme, you go with the WordPress route. But I heard in this article someone said if you're running Drupal, you rarely buy a theme. You really never buy a theme. A theme that's so archaic, you're going to custom code your own website. And I think that's where Drupal kind of has the upper advantage. Like Ryan says, it's geared towards those who really know what they're doing and want to program. They want to be able to really customize their site, and they know what they're doing, and they want to make sure they are able to have full control over it, where they might not have with WordPress. Like I said, it's not a blogging platform, but it's more of a multiple site management platform, and it really caters to someone who wants more control and has that. So I guess, Ryan, so what do you think, who is the target audience for Drupal? Who's someone who's going to be going for Drupal instead of WordPress?
I think the target audience for Drupal is definitely systems administrators or someone who has more technical knowledge of the web, who really knows what they want to do with their website and how to do it. There's a lot of things that WordPress doesn't allow either by default or does not allow at all that Drupal gives you access to get into, and there's a lot of things that you can change, and I'll show you in a minute. I just threw up and installed a Drupal a couple minutes ago. So I'll go on and I'll show you how everything's laid out, but it's a lot different in the way things are organized.
Right, and again, I guess it's really catering towards a different audience. If you're going, like we said, Drupal is catered towards someone who more knows what they're doing and wants the customization factor, and really is going to be going for that. I guess, like you said, it really kind of comes down to the application. It comes down to what you're doing, and Ryan will kind of show us in a minute. Drupal is really something that is definitely going to be more of a learning curve. It's going to be something that you're going to be taking it something more advanced, but it's really going to be it might be able to take your website from WordPress to the next level. So Ryan has the install screen here. Ryan, you want to walk us through kind of how Drupal works?
I want to show the difference between
Perfect.
WordPress and Drupal and their admin interfaces. So I showed this last week. We showed what the WordPress dashboard looks like and how it's very laid out and very structured. And you've got all these things that fly out, and you also all your settings and everything in here. But Drupal, this is the way Drupal is laid out. This is what a default install of Drupal looks like, and you've got your toolbar along the top up here. And there are a lot of different ways to show what you want. There's a lot of different ways to view it, rather. And instead of each page having its own, when you click on a tab, you're actually presented with this menu, basically. And there's a lot of technical differences in the terms between Drupal and WordPress. WordPress uses widgets to describe the things down your sidebar, like these areas right here.
Right.
These are all called widgets, where Drupal calls them blocks. And there's a reason for it calling it that, because if I go into this block page and I show what it provides, it actually, all of the areas are divided up. And you can see, how each thing is breaking. Like the header, the help, the feature, the content, all the sidebars and everything. There was a page that showed where all the blocks was, but I don't remember where they were all located. But I don't remember where it was. It might have been an appearance. There are 4 themes installed by default. It's more than WordPress, but you can certainly install new ones here if you just hit install new themes. The one thing that WordPress has that Drupal lacks in both extensions and in themes is an integrated browser for finding themes and finding plugins.
Right.
You have to go to the Drupal site and find them yourself. And then you just provide it either with the URL or you upload the module by picking it from your computer. So as I was saying before, this really is geared towards people who know what they're doing.
Right.
And you see here you've got this add content option. It says no front page content has been created yet. So if you click add new content, then it's going to bring up this page. And here's another difference between WordPress. They're not called posts, they're called articles. So it says here, use articles for time-sensitive contents like news, press releases, or blog posts, something that you want to be able to age out quickly. And basic pages, WordPress just calls them pages, are static pages that don't change very often. So if we want to create an article for our front page, we add our title, we add our tags, we add the body, then we choose. There's a lot of information down here. You can choose a text format, you can choose an image to associate with it. We've also got a lot of options for display. You can choose to just show it in the menu. You can pick the title, the parent item. You can pick revision information, URL alias. The thing with Drupal is that when the default URL structure does not contain the post name or the date at all. It contains a number, and the numbers are not sequential.
Huh.
So like here it says you can specify an alternative URL, so if you type about, then this page would become the techgeek.org/Drupal/about. Otherwise, this page would become the techgeek.org/Drupal/node/some number, and it's not as easy to remember or to give out. WordPress has options for dealing with this by default. I believe if you go, it's in settings, I believe, you go to permalinks is where I want to go.
And go ahead. Go ahead.
You can just pick, like I said, you can pick all of the information in here. So you can pick, there are common settings you can use. Here's the page numbering, like I mentioned before, and there's a bunch, there's numerics, there's post names, whatever. Drupal, you've got the /node or you've got the URL path. That's all you've got.
And definitely, as someone who has been working with WordPress for a while now and kind of looking at this, I will say, honestly, it's a bit intimidating. It's certainly different. But again, it kind of comes back to different kinds of audience catered to a certain type of person. WordPress, we talked about last week, it's WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. It's very simple, very easy to use. What Ryan's showing here is this is much more complex. There is a lot of learning curve. Ryan, so you use both. Compared to WordPress, what do you think the learning curve is for something like Drupal?
Drupal is definitely higher, and you can see here when you're editing your text, you have no graphical editor. It's a block of text. That's all you get. And you can go down here. You can check. You can put your formats down here. Right. You can pick what HTML tags are allowed, or you can get full HTML. You can get plain text. but there is no graphical editor up here. So if you wanted, say for example in WordPress, you wanted to add a new post and you wanted to make, the first line, hello world, you wanted to make it in bold. So with WordPress, you type hello world, and then you highlight it and you click the bold box, and there you go, it's bolded.
Yep.
And WordPress has this text editor where you can switch where it's just code. So you can get more advanced with WordPress if you wanted to. But to do this in something like Drupal, instead of highlighting it and clicking the bold icon, you have to do this. You have to actually wrap it in the proper HTML tag before it'll show up correctly.
Yep, you better know your HTML. But I'm
No,
assuming...
it's got a preview option just so you can see what it would look like, but you have to know how to do it.
Right. And I'm assuming that anyone who's going to be using Drupal, or at least the Drupal community assumes, that you obviously know something about HTML, and for someone using Drupal and someone developing in Drupal, it's probably, they could do it in their sleep. And HTML isn't hard to learn, but definitely with WordPress, you're kind of catered into something that's very easy, like Ryan said, you have a nice editor that allows you to see bold and italics and everything that you usually do, even though there is the option for HTML, but there's certainly a pretty big stark difference. I'm going to show here, this is my WordPress website here, as Ryan was kind of showing off Drupal, just to kind of show you how easy it is. Though it took time, the front end of my website, robustech.com, I'll see if I can show it again. As you can see, there's all these different blocks that kind of make up this content, and I can scroll down and see all the different things. It wasn't very hard to do. This whole this front page is very easy. There's a couple of settings in the theme, and it's basically just widgets, like Ryan said. There's blocks on WordPress. This was widgets, and all I had to do was just put a couple of widgets in here. I defined a couple of things. I said which categories I had. You kind of have to know a bit about structuring, but it was extremely simple. And to compare that to Drupal, if I wanted to do the same thing, I'm sure that would have been a lot of coding, a lot of different trial and error, and you obviously need to know your stuff. But I'm sure Drupal, like I said, where WordPress lacks, Drupal has a lot of nice back-end features that allows you to really customize that and know really what you're doing. And
if you want to switch back to what I'm showing, I'll show you some of the settings now. These are all the Drupal modules that are installed by default. And you can see there is a long list of them that lets you pick exactly what you want to show on your site. So these are just the core modules. A lot of them are disabled by default because it's something you may not necessarily use. So you've got the aggregator here, which is syndicated content. Of course, the block module is required, but you can see here the blog module is disabled by default because Drupal is not meant for a blogging site.
Right.
And also the book module is disabled, which allows users, to create and organize content. Color, comment, and that stuff is enabled. Contact forms are disabled. Translation, links, dashboards, whatever. Field API, there's APIs, there's file types, there's filters. You can disable the help section if you wanted to. There's also, Drupal has a forum option built in where you can create a built-in discussion forum using Drupal instead of having to install separate software like IPB or PHPBB.
Right.
You can enable that right from Drupal, and it's all integrated and tied in. So like I said, just a lot of different things that can be customized here. Like you have the option to enable PHP coding directly inside your website, directly inside your pages, and you can enable polls and logging and testing, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can customize.
Right, so I guess let's put it simply here. Go back, watch our WordPress show. Take what you know in WordPress, the basic foundation that it's a blogging platform by nature. It's what it was intended to be, and there's a lot of, you kind of build up customization to make it something different. Just take that and flip it for Drupal. It's something different by nature, and to make it a blogging platform, you really got to work up to it. And I'd say, don't you think that's kind of the case, Ryan, where WordPress really excels as a blogging platform, and to make it something different, you kind of got to build up to. Drupal, if you want to make it a blogging platform, it can be done, but you really got to work to make it happen.
Well, I mean, you don't really have to work to make it happen. All you have to do is enable the blog module and set it there. But yeah, it's not meant for that because, like I said, Drupal works very much on the idea of static pages and static content, not necessarily blogging. And I did show, I showed that you could create articles. Those are not blog posts. I want to make that difference very clear. Those are not blog posts. Those are articles. They are what they are. They're articles created by the website's administrator to showcase something specific. It's not
Interesting.
meant for users to, write about what they did that day. It's a completely different premise, but it's like Drupal described it as. It's very much meant for, content that you need to age out, like time-sensitive content, news, press releases, or
Right.
blog posts. And you can configure Drupal to show blog posts on the front page, but that's not what it's meant for. On the flip side, with WordPress, you can show the default setup of WordPress is to show blog posts on the front page, and then you can have separate pages in your navigation.
Right.
It's not hard to make WordPress show static page, show a page for its first page, but it's not meant to do that by default, where
Exactly.
Drupal is.
Right. And then I guess that kind of comes back to the differences here. If and we were gonna, I keep saying this, but I think it's so true. Is that obviously both of them have a very good community, but the communities are different. For Drupal, you have a really good community that allows you to be able to interact with people who kind of know a little bit more about web management, what they're doing, and you could really build it up to something powerful. Whereas WordPress has a great community, but it's based on plugins and themes, and it's definitely something different. And I kind of wanted to showcase here real quick who is using Drupal. What is a Drupal WordPress? Not a Drupal WordPress. What does a Drupal website look like? Obviously, WordPress websites, they can look totally different, but there's something about them. At least I can tell. Usually, 75% of the time, if I see a website and I think it's WordPress, it usually is. And you can just right click, see the source code to see if it's WordPress. It's a very simple source code to break down. But with Drupal websites, they're very different. You wouldn't necessarily know they're a Drupal website. So, for example, one of the most well-known probably would be Twit. Very big podcasting network here on the web, and this is their website, and their website is run entirely off of Drupal. Now, they kind of, in a sense, got the best of both worlds, where they kind of use a little bit more heavily of the content management system, but they have a lot of things going on here that's very custom. I guarantee you they have a ton of stuff going on in the back end that makes this very, very complex. I'm sure they have a very complex workflow that really automates a lot of this process and kind of makes it how it is. Whereas in WordPress, a lot of this stuff to do in a sense where Drupal kind of automates it, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to make sure that it looks the same, or at least it works the same on WordPress. So what do you think, Ryan? What websites have you seen running Drupal, and how would they differ? Do you think you can know if a website's running WordPress? Then you check can you usually tell?
Sometimes I can. A lot of big news sites use WordPress, just because it's easy to create content and switch it out, and it really interface with it really well. So if it's a lot of big sites, TechCrunch, Gizmodo, Lifehacker, all those are using WordPress as their backend. For a Drupal site, it's not necessarily as easy to tell, just because, like I mentioned, there's a lot of the backend stuff that you can customize, and if you really configure Drupal correctly, you wouldn't know.
Right.
You really wouldn't know.
Right, I'm just kind of showing off here. Here are some other ones, Drupal case studies that show who's using Drupal. Here you have colleges that are using it. You have what is this, e-business platform, tourism platforms. And you'll notice, when I was going through this yesterday, one of the things you notice about this is these websites, and it's hard to explain to a novice, but to break it down easy, they require a backend. They require some kind of service, some kind of system that is running. Here's a great example. This is what I was talking about yesterday when I saw this. This is a public storage website. This is an awesome example. And I can only zoom it in, but I can't bring it up more. This, as you can see here, this is an access self-storage website, easy as 1, 2, 3. When I look at this, I go, this is something that I believe that Drupal was meant for, that WordPress would not be good at. Obviously, there's some kind of backend going on here, and I'm sure Ryan knows more about this than I do. There's some kind of database logging. There's a lot of service checks to see, what's available, finding zip codes, finding all these things. I'm sure this website, that what looks simple on the front end, has a very, very complex backend that has a lot of things going on to work for this. And wouldn't you agree, Ryan? This would be something that WordPress would not be very useful for, that you'd have to do something like this on Drupal?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to do something like that on Drupal. WordPress really can be made to do anything that you want it to do within reason. And if there's not something available for WordPress that you need, then you can make it. That's where I mentioned last week with WordPress.org containing the codex,
Right.
which is a documentation of all the code inside WordPress and what every little function does. And I don't know if Drupal provides something to that degree. Drupal is better for the more intensive systems that need processing like that, WordPress is not built for it, but it can do it if the code is written correctly.
Right, and I'm assuming, we'll kind of get to this a little more when we talk about how to get started, but I'm assuming that with Drupal, interface is a lot better with more complex backends like reservation systems and lookups that, I don't know how exactly that works. Does Drupal kind of work better with those kind of things? At least I can assume so.
I couldn't really say just because it's been a few years since I've really used Drupal in a production environment. I haven't really looked into what it can support, but I think it would be a good candidate for interfacing with that. And I mean, there are other web platforms that do it as well, but it is a good one if you need something more robust that's going to be reliable and not going to break so easily.
Right. So simple. Just to make it simple again, you got WordPress, casual. Well, not necessarily casual. WordPress, I think they're two kind of different audiences. We'll get into a little bit more about WordPress versus Drupal in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about security. We talked about WordPress. It's very secure. Both platforms are pretty secure because they're open source. What do you think, Ryan, compared to WordPress or just in general, how is Drupal security?
Drupal harps very much on permissions, and I'm gonna bring my screen share back here in a second just to show you what I'm talking about. We also talked about the auto update feature of
yes,
of WordPress. You're gonna lose my video for just a second while I switch.
All right. I'll bring it back.
Let's see. Okay, start. Okay, so we talked about the auto updating stuff with WordPress, and it's possible to do it, and it'll do it by itself, but it won't nag you.
Right.
If you notice where I was showing this before, it was a nag on every page that my version is outdated. This red banner right here is on the top of every single management page I go to.
Interesting.
Drupal also requires a task to run on the server at a periodic interval. You're supposed to set up what's known as a cron job, which means it's a task that runs every so often. And it's used to check for new versions and do things like that. It is required for Drupal to stay up to date for you to run that cron job.
Huh.
It really does have to be run. And I'll talk here. I'll go to the people's configuration, and we can see my username here, and well, that's not really what I wanted, but I'll go back to so you've got username, password, email address, roles, administrative overlay, locale settings. This isn't what I was looking for. What I was looking for is this. In the modules page, you see how there's permissions options right here. WordPress does not give you this. So if I click permissions, I just went into comment modules, you can look and you can see there's an anonymous user, there's an authenticated user, and there's an administrator option. And for permissions, it lets you pick what each level of user has access to do. So you can see here, for the comment module, an anonymous user can view comments, but only an authenticated user can post them. Only authenticated users can skip comment approvals, and authenticated users cannot edit their own comments by default. If I wanted to enable this, I could. It's just a checkbox, and I scroll down and I hit OK. The other thing, too, is you notice here is that some of the administrator boxes are grayed out. And this is saying that the permission is inherited from the authenticated user role. So if I turn off view comments for authenticated user, I now have the option to turn it off for the administrator. But if it's on for the authenticated user, it's on for the administrator.
Interesting.
And so you can see the administrator has every permission set, where a lot of things, a lot of stuff, especially down near the bottom where you get into the more advanced modules, authenticated users have no access to. So authenticated users cannot view the dashboard. They cannot administer filters. They cannot use the full HTML text format. And this is a big security thing here. If you read this warning here, it says, warning, this permission may have security implications depending on how the text format is configured. The filtered HTML format only allows about 10 or 15 or so tags to be used in posts, which are non-harmful. It doesn't allow scripts, it doesn't allow iframes, anything like that. The full HTML text format allows anything inside the HTML spec to be set. And for that reason, only the administrator has permission to access it by default. Should a regular user get access to this, and you have a regular user, say, that goes rogue, it can have a very, very bad effect on your site. because a user could very easily insert code that would crash your site. It would cause them to not work right. It could cause a compromise of usernames and passwords. It can just cause a lot of not good things. So this is where Drupal really excels.
Interesting. So it really is the nitty gritty management, security stuff that pretty much anyone who's really serious about it, or at least knows what they're doing, is going to want access to.
Right, definitely. And we've also got here, we've got roles. We can add new roles and assign permissions to these roles. So anonymous user and authenticated users are locked. You cannot edit these roles because there is nothing, there's nothing back and forth that you can change. You can't change its name, whatever. But say we wanted to add a moderator role. So someone that we wanted to maybe have access to content options, but not necessarily access to site options. So we're going to add this moderator role here, and we're going to say the role has been added. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go into edit permissions for the moderator, and we're going to get to pick what the moderator can do. And if we go, let me go back to modules and permissions. If we look here, moderator comes up, and it's actually over here in the moderator side. So we get to pick. We now have 4 columns here. We've got anonymous user, we've got authenticated user, we've got administrator, and now we've got moderator. So let's say we wanted to say we could allow the moderator to edit their own comments. We could allow them to change comment settings. We could allow them to use the links and view the administrative dashboard. We could. We don't want. So see, this is the thing here: is that some of the things from the moderator, if you add a new group, it's inherited from the authenticated user, and you can turn that on and off there. This is some filtered HTML. Is something that the authenticated user really should have access to. Otherwise, it's just going to be plain text. You're not going to be able to do anything with your formatting. We could say. If you edit and delete all content based on permission restrictions, so we might want to give this to a moderator. They're allowed to go and edit content. Maybe we want to say we want to give them access to administer content. We want to give them access to content overview. We want to give them, permissions to view unpublished content, view revisions, delete revisions, create new and edit content for either for your user, or edit or delete content from other users. And you can change URL aliases. You can use the administrator search. You can do a bunch of things. So Drupal is really good if you want permission customization.
Right, and just to kind of show the flip side, I have WordPress pulled up right here. What Ryan was just showing with the user, this is all that WordPress gives me. I have a couple options. I have a username option, so I can say, okay, this is the username I want. I have the email option, what their email is. I can set the first name, last name, the website, the password, and then I have different roles here. So I have subscriber, which basically gives you no access to anything. Administrator, full control. Editor, I think you get a little bit more. You get a little bit more power over the post and everything. Editor.
Yeah, that allows you to create and change your own posts.
Right. Author, you can write posts, and then contributor. It kind of goes down in a descending order from access. So obviously, administrator, top dog, you can do everything to contributor, who really has a little bit more access than subscriber, who has nothing. But then you kind of build up from there. And that's kind of how it is. It's very, very simple.
Well, let me talk to you for a minute about how WordPress does user permissions and what the different groups mean. Let me talk to you about that, because WordPress, I mean, it does have some options. Where am I? I want to find. That's not what I want. I want to go to. Okay, here's where I want to go. Okay, so here we've got roles. And you mentioned this before. Subscriber, they only have access to comment, to view and comment. That's all they have access to do. The contributor allows users to submit content to the site, but it will not go live without approval. It has to be approved by a moderator. An author allows you to write your own post without requiring approval, but you can't edit anyone else's posts. An editor will allow you to create posts without approval. It will allow you to... But it will also allow you to manage content. It will allow you to manage other people's posts and pages. And basically, the editor has access to posts, media, links, pages, comments, and feedbacks. Basically, the second group in the administration panel.
So pretty much all your content except for website stuff like themes and widgets and all that stuff.
Right. It's right below the administrator. The administrator, has full control over site content, where the editor has access to content management, but that's it.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. We're going to be talking a little bit more about Drupal and WordPress after this. We're going to be talking about if you're still on the fence, we're going to be saying if you should go Drupal or WordPress, and we're going to be talking about how to get started with Drupal. You know, we've kind of talked about it. We talked about WordPress.org. No, we talked about WordPress.com last time. Is there an alternative for Drupal? We'll talk about that. But first, I want to give it up a very big thanks to Zygen Hosting.
Web at Night would like to take a minute to thank our sponsor for this show, Zygen Hosting. Zygen Hosting is a established web and VPS hosting provider that's been in business since August 2008. With service and friendly staff, the customer always comes first. Web at Night listeners receive a special 20% discount on their already low-priced web and VPS hosting packages and domain registrations using the promo code Web at Night. Please note that this code does not apply to BNC hosting, shell hosting, IRCD hosting, product upgrades, or product add-ons. We now return to the show.
Zygen Hosting, Web at Night, 20% off. Still a killer deal, I think. It's awesome. As well, I want to give a big thanks to OWC, Otherworld Computing, iOS device accessories like iPad cases, iPad podiums, which I'll show off next week. All kind of different things, as well as RAM upgrades, hard drive upgrades. They do a bunch of stuff. MacSales.com, Otherworld Computing. They've been in the business since 1988, I believe. They're awesome. MacSales.com. Thank Zygen Hosting very much, as well as OWC for their support of Web at Night. So, Ryan, as we kind of wrap things up here, if you want to get started with Drupal, we talked about WordPress.com, the web-based way to kind of get your feet wet with WordPress, to kind of be able to experience WordPress without without having unlimited access to everything, but you at least kind of get to learn the interface. Is there an alternative for that like Drupal? Is there any Drupal.com?
There is not. We mentioned last week the difference between WordPress.com and WordPress.org, where WordPress.com was the website where you're allowed to create your own blogging platform, but that's it. Or you're allowed to create your own platform, your own website without using something else. You don't have to install it on your own server. They run it for you. Drupal has no such alternative, at least not directly from the company. Where for Drupal, you have to install it on your own site. Now, I'm sure there are web hosting providers that will set up, a Drupal package for you, but you still have to pay for that. There is no WordPress.com alternative for Drupal. And like we mentioned last week, excuse me, you can set up your own web server on your computer using XAMPP, XAMPP, which will allow you, to run a website. It has everything that you need to run a website on your local computer,
right?
Whether you want it to be web accessible or not. But for Drupal, there's no easy way to do it.
So really, if you're looking to play around and you don't have money to burn, like we have one web server, you're not going to pay for test benches. You really just need to go the XAMPP route. XAMPP has all the things you're going to need, and just like WordPress, you install it like that, and you're just going to have to run it locally. Also, Ryan, we talked about last week how with most web hosting companies, there's like a one-click install for WordPress. What's the install process like for Drupal? Is there any kind of easy-to-use installer? Is it one-click, or is it more complex?
Well, for this installation, just to get it up and going really quick, I used the automatic installer from my web provider just to get something up quickly. But I'm gonna see. I'm gonna go to the Drupal documentation, and I'll show you. Okay. So here's the installation guide. Let me switch my video over to that. Okay. So here's the documentation, the installation guide for Drupal, and there's a lot of stuff that you need to do. You need to make sure that, number one, your web server has the right requirements. It requires 15 megabytes, 60 megabytes is needed for a website with modules and themes. Drupal, you have to have a MySQL database, you have to have a certain PHP version, you have to have a whole bunch of stuff. You have to make sure you have all that.
Right.
Next thing you need to do is you need to download and extract Drupal. You have to download the source file. You have to download the source package and extract it, and then upload it to. You have to upload it to your website, and you have to do it through FTP, or you have to have shell access and do it directly, whatever. And after that, you need to create your database manually. These first few steps are stuff that WordPress requires. This is just the nitty-gritty stuff to get the Drupal actually on your site. So WordPress has the same thing. This is where it becomes different. This is where it starts to become different. The settings file. For Drupal, you have to create your settings file yourself. You have to take the example file and you have to open it in a code editor and you have to modify the settings to fit your site. WordPress does this with a graphical interface.
Right.
It gives you a list of options that you need to fill in, like 5 or 6.
Right.
And then it does it. It creates your configuration file. It creates everything that it needs to in the database. But for this, you need to create your information. You need to create your configuration file and edit it manually. Then you need to run your installation script. You have to use what profile. You have to pick the profile for the installation. Pick the language. Make sure your requirements are good. Make sure your database is good. You have to make sure the permissions on everything is set right. You have to configure the site. You have to do, just a whole bunch of stuff, and then it finally becomes complete. And then you have to do, you have to set permissions on your files. You're going to be guided through, several screens to set everything up and yada yada. Then you need to configure the clean URLs. These are things I told you about. You've got the /node/83. Some web servers do not allow this, or they only allow this rather. They do not allow this. If you look up in my address bar right here, it says /getting-started/clean URLs.
Right.
Some web servers would actually look for a directory on the website called getting-started. And if it doesn't exist, then it would just throw a 404 not found error. And you'd have to use arguments like this down here. Clean URLs allows your site to drop that, $Q equals whatever. It's called URL rewriting. And clean URLs, it's not enabled on all web servers, and it goes through and it tells you how to do it. So you have to check that as well. WordPress, usually it always almost works. And if it doesn't, then it will tell you and have you fix it.
Right.
Then, like I said here, you've got to set up your cron job. I mentioned this before, that you need to set up this cron job to make sure that Drupal can update itself and make sure that everything on the site is working okay, because it requires these timers. And after installation, you've just got some things to look over through. But the install process for Drupal is much more involved than it is with WordPress. You've got, like I've mentioned, you've got permissions. You've got, the creation of your configuration files. You've got the cron job. Just a bunch of stuff that WordPress doesn't require. Right. So while using Drupal, it's a little more involved to actually get it set up. If you're looking for something more powerful, it's worth putting in the 5 or so minutes that it takes.
Right. So I think that kind of wraps it up very nicely. WordPress is very customizable. It's powerful in its own way. But if you're someone who wants to take full control over every aspect of your website and you kind of have an idea of what you're doing and you have the ability to build it yourself, go the Drupal route. Unless, if you want to get started, you're looking for an easier website and you want to do some customization, but you want an easy back end, easy to use, and not too big of a learning curve, it's going to be WordPress. I think that kind of wraps it up. We kind of went through the whole gamut of Drupal here. I appreciate it, Ryan. Is there anything else you want to say just to kind of wrap things up about Drupal?
Really, I think you need to consider what you're going to be using your site for.
Yes.
If you're going to be using your site more as a news site, you're going to have new content coming on frequently. Use something like WordPress. If you need something more powerful that's maybe not going to change as often, but you still need it to work reliably, then go with Drupal, because it just gives you more options that the experienced web administrator is going to use.
Right. Exactly. I think that was great. robustech.com/WAN is where you can go. There's audio and video feeds of this show available. We syndicate it in iTunes. You can search for Web at Night. Video. Obviously, the video you get a little bit more. Ryan showing off a lot of his screen casts, and obviously you can still follow with the audio, but the video you get, very nice video. You get clean video. You get to see our beautiful faces, and you get to see what we're showing off on the website. But audio is available as well. It's also available on YouTube. YouTube.com/RobIsTechNetwork. Couldn't get Rob is Tech. I don't know who has that little thing in YouTube, but Rob is Tech Network is where you can go. You can get all the information. All the videos are done on there. And of course, robistech.com has all of the shows we do, as well as these shows, and you can get them pretty much a couple hours after the show is done. They're syndicated and they're up and ready to go. Ryan, thanks so much for being on. We'll have to see about next week what we will pursue, but thanks so much for being on and all the information.
Yeah, you're welcome. I always enjoy doing the show, and I'll look back to having being back here with you next week to discuss our next topic for the week.
Next topic, we'll have to see. I don't know if we're going to continue the content management system or do something completely different. It's a mystery, so you're going to have to come out and watch. We do the show live. I think we're going to stick with Tuesdays. We haven't got a firm time yet, but it's usually around 3 or 4 p.m. Eastern, 12 or 1 p.m. Pacific. We're kind of working on that, but it's going to be Tuesdays. Again, all information is robistech.com. The mystery is next week. What will we be discussing? What will we be going over? It's all going to be a mystery, so you got to tune in next week on next week's episode of Web at Night. Thanks so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next week.